The Manchester Chartist, Chapter 14. Bess Ackroyd wrapped a shawl around her tightly as she emerged from the mill. It was Friday lunchtime and a bitterly cold day, but she was eager for news. It was now almost 4 weeks since the mill hands at Nelson Mill had presented their petition to Jacob Kennedy. Much to their surprise, the mill superintendent had treated the deputation, led by Lisa Hodgkinson, with courtesy, and he promised to draw it to Nathaniel West's attention that morning. Immediately after lunch, their initial optimism had been cruelly vanquished. Jacob informed them West had rejected their requests out of hand, and he dared them to do their worst, threatening to sack every one of them. Lisa informed Jacob they were leaving the mill to hold a meeting, and the likelihood was none of the operatives would be returning to work until West saw sense and met their terms. To do otherwise, she told him, would be to acquiesce in the murder of future victims, and they were not prepared to have workers' deaths on their conscience, whatever Nathaniel West's wishes. Whilst her friends spread the message amongst the rest of the workforce, Lisa had hurried into the mill basement to inform her husband the moment of decision had arrived. He'd nodded grimly at the news. "Dinna fret thyself, lass. I'll ensure there's no power to drive mill machinery until you return victorious." With that, he turned to the Crossfield twin-cylinder beam engine, which he'd tended, modified and improved with loving care over the past 6 years. He opened the main pressure valve, smiling to himself. It looked as though some more modifications might be required to the old engine. He began to undo the nuts fastening the boiler drain plug, as Bess Ackroyd had suggested. Leaving her husband to his work, Lisa had returned to catch up with her comrades as they filed out into Loom Street. The meeting hadn't taken long to reach its decision. The Nelson Mill operatives decided for a turnout by an overwhelming majority, and vowed not to return until their demands were met in full. Bess knew Irene Rose had since informed Lisa that Nathaniel West was becoming increasingly frustrated. He'd attempted to recruit workers from Glasgow, and some had turned up in Manchester, only to return home or to seek alternative employment in the town as soon as they were made aware of the issues at stake. At the same time, West had failed to find a millwright willing to assist him restart the mill engine. Lisa's husband had hidden the boiler plug once he'd removed it, and without that the manager couldn't provide work for anyone, friend or foe. It was obvious to anybody it was now only a matter of time before the workers returned to work victorious. Bess also knew Matthew Ethrow had met his old friend Josiah West once more and offered to find a solution that would save Nathaniel's face. But Josiah had said his son was obstinate and determined to see the workers starve before he backed down. Nonetheless, he'd assured Matthew he would keep trying to convince Nathaniel to see sense. As Bess approached Nelson Mill, a crowd of operatives stood in the street outside the main entrance, as they'd done every day since the beginning of the turnout, whilst others covered the loading bays at the sides and rear, determined to let no finished products out of the mill or any scab labour or knobsticks in. "Bess! Bess, love!" The spinner looked across the road, attracted by the sound of Irene Rose's voice. Her friend stood on the corner with her father, Michael O'Donnell. Bess smiled and waved a greeting. The thought crossed her mind that Irene Rose and Michael seemed to be spending a lot of time together of late. Romance was in the air, she decided. The spinner began to cross the road to join them, eager to learn if Matthew and his daughter were the bearers of good news for the Nelson Mill turnouts. At that moment, she heard the sound of horses' hooves clattering on the cobbles. She stopped in her tracks, turned sideways, and looked up, trying to take in what she saw before her. A pale-faced rider, wielding a baton, his flaxen hair streaming out behind him, his expression a contorted mask of hate and fury, galloped around the corner on a white horse, and headed straight for her, followed by some half a dozen others. Irene Rose froze in shock and horror as she witnessed Bess fling her arms up in an attempt to protect her body, and then watched as a friend went down, the slavering horse cantering over her. She heard her friend's head hit the cobbles with a sickening crack, so loud that the sound of hoofs failed to drown it out. Then she was running without thought for her own safety, and kneeling down alongside a friend and mentor, whilst Ozzy's hoofs rang out on the cobbles all around them. "Bess! Bess! Oh my God! Hang on, Bess! Stay with us for pity's sake!" Blood was streaming from Bess's left ear, and gushing from a great cut in her scalp above. Her face had turned the colour of the yellowy-grey winter sky, and her shallow breathing came in painful, short gasps, a flying hoof having cracked a rib. She opened her dark eyes, winced, and managed to smile at Irene Rose for a fleeting moment. She struggled, as if trying to make her lips move, making every effort to speak. At last she summoned up all her remaining energy to whisper, "Tell Daniel I loves him, Rose. They've killed me, and they've killed me new babby. Don't let 'em." With that she said no more. Irene Rose slowly lifted her face to the heavens, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks. The mill owner's daughter let out a great, high-pitched, piercing wail of grief, pain, and anger. Echoing off the mill walls, the terrible vibrating curse on Nathaniel West and the crushing evil forces of anarchy the Industrial Revolution had unleashed travelled down Loom Street in shocking, rolling waves. In industrial capitalism's historically brief existence, these forces had moulded, corrupted, and dehumanized the mill owners. They'd impoverished, killed, and maimed many working men, women, and children, and had now taken away Irene Rose's dearest and closest friend. A wailing lament arrested the attention of all who heard it, making each and every one in all the courts, lanes and streets around stop dead in their tracks in shock, before she too lost consciousness. "I'm sorry, Matthew, I really am. Your friend's death is truly a tragic accident." "An accident? Bess Ackroyd's death wasn't an accident. It was cold-calculated murder, Josiah. It was your son, your Nathaniel, God damn his soul, who carried it out." "Matthew, I know you're upset, and I sympathise, I really do. But Nathaniel didn't intend to kill anyone, you must believe that. Your Nathaniel rode around that corner like a devil out of hell. He was wielding a 4-foot-long baton, and he was at the head of 6 drunken devils, armed in the same way and determined to do the same thing. He had one thought in his head, and that was to break heads. If Michael O'Donnell hadn't been there, your operatives would have torn him to pieces limb by limb, and I'm sure God would have forgiven them for doing so." Josiah West shook his head in despair, looking down at the table. "It's all very tragic. I will do what I can to help Mrs. Ackroyd's husband and her son." Matthew shook his head in his turn, trying to keep calm, his anger building up inside him. "Don't you dare go anywhere near Daniel Ackroyd. He'll treat any offer of help from you with contempt. You'll be lucky to escape his vengeance. If I found myself in his position, I hate to think what I might do. Your son has destroyed his life. He's taken away his wife, his childhood sweetheart, the love of his life, and he's killed his unborn child. There's nothing you or your family can do for Daniel. Nothing." He locked his eyes onto the man he once knew as a good friend. "There's only one thing you can do now, Josiah. You can ensure your mill hands are treated with respect. Give your operatives what they want. It's little enough they're asking for, God only knows. Or are you willing to see more of your workers maimed and killed? Contact Michael O'Donnell straight away, I beg of you. Tell him the workers can return to work, and you will pay them for the time they've lost." He gazed at his friend, imploring him with his eyes to see sense. "If you do that, Josiah, you can begin to make some sort of amends. It's the only way open to you. You must dedicate your life to their welfare. That's what Bess Ackroyd would want, and it's what you owe her. Make sure her death wasn't in vain. Do it for God's sake and your soul's salvation." Josiah looked lost and bewildered. Matthew stood up, a look of disgust on his face. "There's nothing more I can say to you, Josiah. You're a great disappointment to me. I'll say good day to you and leave you with your conscience, assuming you still have one. You'll have your God to answer to soon enough." With that he picked up his hat and turned to go. "Nay, stay, Matthew. Don't leave me here alone." Matthew turned towards him once more, hope replacing anger and despair. The old man seemed to be utterly downcast. Eventually Josiah nodded. "Yes, I'll do it, Matthew. You're right. I'll do as you ask. I'll take personal control of the mill from now on, as God is my witness. I'll try my best to make amends. It should never have come to this." "That's more like it. Now you're seeing sense, Josiah. I'll help you, old friend. This is what we'll do." Once Michael O'Donnell had managed to calm the operatives, persuading them not to lower themselves to Nathaniel's level and to call the police instead, he'd arranged for an ambulance for Bessie's corpse, and then he'd carried Irene Rhodes to Mary Upton's cottage. Mary had managed to revive her, and the mill owner's daughter now sat pale-faced at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of sweet tea, comforted by Amy Redbank. "You need to be getting Rose home soon, Michael. The lass is in shock and will be for some time." "Do you know where Daniel is, Mary?" "Nay, I don't, lad. But he'll be here to see young Daniel sooner or later, I'll be bound. I don't know how I'm going to explain what's happened." "We'll wait here for him, and then we'll take him and young Daniel around to my father's house," Irene Rose suddenly said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Poor Daniel's going to be devastated. I must remain here to comfort him. I want him and young Daniel to stay with father and myself, at least for the immediate future, and for as long as Daniel's comfortable with us." She looked at the man she'd fallen in love with and the woman who'd helped bring her into the world. "We have the room, and I owe it to Bess. I mustn't let her down. Young Daniel must have a proper childhood and a decent education."